At the Classic Boxing Club in Phoenix, 52-year-old retired boxer, Iron Tony Martinez, was about to make the biggest mistake of his career, when he mocked 73-year-old Chuck Norris as an old fighter whose time has passed. He would learn that legends never truly retire. The Classic Boxing Club in Phoenix stood as a monument to the golden age of professional boxing, where the sport's most cherished traditions were preserved with the reverence typically reserved for sacred ground. The gym's weathered brick walls displayed decades of fight posters, championship belts, and black-and-white photographs of legendary fighters whose names had become synonymous with courage, skill, and the timeless pursuit of boxing excellence. The atmosphere inside classic boxing carried the weight of history in every corner. Vintage speed bags clicked in rhythmic precision, their tempo providing a metronome for serious training that had remained unchanged since the sport's greatest era. Heavy bags bore the scuff marks of countless champions who had honed their craft within these walls, while the wooden floors, worn smooth by generations of fighters' footwork, creaked with the accumulated memory of thousands of hours spent in pursuit of perfection. Antonio "Iron" Martinez moved through this hallowed environment with the quiet authority of someone who had earned his place among the gym's legends. At 52 years old, he carried himself with the distinctive bearing of a fighter who had once commanded respect in the professional ranks, shoulders square, posture erect, eyes that still tracked movement with the automatic precision of someone trained to read combat situations in fractions of seconds. Tony's nickname Iron had been earned through 15 years of professional boxing that had established him as one of the most durable middleweight contenders of his era. Standing 5 feet 11 inches with the lean, wiry build that characterized classic boxers from previous generations, he had compiled a record of 48 wins, 12 losses, and 2 draws, statistics that told the story of a fighter who had faced elite competition throughout his career and had given better than he received in most encounters. His fighting style had been built around defensive mastery and tactical intelligence rather than knockout power. Tony had been the kind of boxer who frustrated opponents through superior ring IQ, precise counterpunching, and an almost supernatural ability to make dangerous fighters look ordinary through positioning, timing, and the accumulation of small tactical advantages that added up to decisive victories. Boxing is like chess played at light speed, Tony would tell the young fighters he now mentored at Classic Boxing. You can't just throw punches and hope for the best. Every movement has to have purpose, every combination has to set up the next opportunity, and every defensive action has to create offensive possibility. This approach had served Tony extraordinarily well throughout his competitive career. He had challenged for a world title twice, losing narrow decisions that many observers believed he had won. His reputation within the boxing community was built not just on his competitive achievements, but on his profound understanding of the sport's tactical subtleties and his ability to compete effectively against much larger, stronger opponents through superior technique and fight intelligence. Tony's retirement from active competition had been voluntary rather than forced, a rare achievement in professional boxing, where most careers end through accumulated damage or diminished skills rather than personal choice. At age 37, still competitive and relatively unmarked by his years in the ring, he had decided that he had accomplished everything he realistically could as a fighter and wanted to transition to the next phase of his boxing life while his health and faculties remained intact. The past 15 years had seen Tony evolve into one of the most respected trainers and mentors in the southwestern United States. His understanding of boxing fundamentals, combined with his ability to communicate complex tactical concepts to fighters of varying skill levels, had made him a sought-after coach for both amateur prospects and established professionals looking to refine their craft. Tony sees things other people miss was a common observation among the boxing community in Phoenix. He can watch a fighter for 5 minutes and tell you exactly what they need to work on to reach the next level. But Tony's transition from active competitor to elder statesman had also created in him a complex relationship with fighters from previous generations who continued to maintain public profiles long after their competitive careers had ended. In his view, there was something unseemly about former champions who refused to acknowledge that their time had passed, who continued to insert themselves into contemporary boxing discussions as if their outdated experience remained relevant to modern competition. Real fighters know when to step aside, Tony would say whenever the topic of aging legends arose. There's dignity in knowing when your chapter is over and letting the next generation take the spotlight. This philosophy reflected Tony's belief that boxing was fundamentally a young man's sport, where reflexes, conditioning, and hunger determined success more than accumulated wisdom or past accomplishments. In his worldview, fighters who had been inactive for decades simply couldn't understand how the sport had evolved, how training methods had advanced, or how contemporary competition differed from the boxing of their era. The classic boxing club where Tony trained reflected this perspective. While the gym honored boxing history and tradition, its primary focus was on developing active fighters who could compete successfully in contemporary boxing. The facility attracted serious amateurs, professional prospects, and established fighters who understood that success required staying current with modern training methods and tactical approaches. Mickey Torres, the gym's owner and head trainer, had worked with champions across multiple generations and understood the delicate balance between respecting boxing tradition and embracing progressive training methods. He appreciated Tony's contributions to the gym's culture, while occasionally questioning his sometimes dismissive attitude toward fighters from previous eras. "Tony, experience doesn't expire like milk," Mickey would say during their discussions about boxing philosophy. "Sometimes the old-timers know things that got forgotten along the way." Tony's response was always respectful but firm. "Mickey, I respect what those guys accomplished in their time, but fighting evolved. What worked 30 years ago doesn't work against contemporary competition. The sport moves forward, and fighters who don't move with it become irrelevant." That Wednesday afternoon, the gym was hosting a special seminar about mental toughness and competitive longevity, featuring speakers who would address the psychological aspects of maintaining excellence across extended periods. The event had drawn participants from throughout the regional boxing community, all eager to learn from experts who understood the unique challenges of sustaining high-level performance in a demanding sport. Among the invited speakers was Chuck Norris, who had been asked to discuss the mental discipline required for competitive excellence across multiple decades. Chuck's invitation had come through connections that Tony didn't fully understand. Apparently, his reputation for sustained excellence in martial arts competition had attracted attention from those interested in how competitive drive could be maintained long past traditional retirement age. Chuck arrived at classic boxing dressed in simple dark slacks and a gray polo shirt, his presence immediately recognizable but characteristically understated. At 73 years old, he moved through the boxing environment with obvious respect for its culture and traditions, pausing to acknowledge trainers and fighters with the kind of courtesy that suggested genuine appreciation for the sport's demanding nature. Accompanying Chuck were Dr. Maria Santos, a sports psychologist who specialized in peak performance across extended careers, and Eddie Vasquez, a former bantamweight contender who now worked as a boxing analyst for regional television broadcasts. They had come to the seminar as part of a broader research project about how competitive athletes could maintain excellence and relevance long past traditional retirement age. "Mr. Norris," Dr. Santos explained as they toured the facility, "we're particularly interested in your perspective on how competitive drive can be sustained across multiple decades of high-level training and competition." Chuck nodded thoughtfully, his eyes taking in the gym's equipment and atmosphere with obvious appreciation. "Boxing and martial arts both require the kind of mental commitment that doesn't automatically diminish with age. The physical demands change, but the underlying principles of dedication and continuous improvement remain constant." Tony had been observing Chuck's arrival from across the gym, his assessment colored by assumptions that reflected his fundamental skepticism toward aging athletes who maintained public profiles long after their competitive relevance had ended. Here was someone whose primary claim to contemporary significance came from entertainment rather than recent competitive achievement. Someone who, in Tony's worldview, represented exactly the kind of past-focused thinking that prevented boxing from moving forward. "Another old-timer trying to stay relevant," Tony muttered to Carlos Mendez, a promising welterweight prospect who often sought Tony's advice about both technical and career matters. "What can someone who hasn't competed seriously in decades teach active fighters about modern competition?" Carlos, who had been boxing professionally for 3 years, and had developed tremendous respect for Tony's tactical knowledge, glanced at Tony with the careful expression of someone who had learned to navigate his mentor's, sometimes complex attitudes about boxing history. "Tony, Chuck Norris was a legitimate champion before he got into movies. Guy had serious competitive credentials." Tony's response reflected his genuine belief that competitive relevance had a limited shelf life, regardless of past accomplishments. "Credentials from when? The 1970s? Carlos, the sport has evolved completely since then. Training methods, competition levels, tactical sophistication. Everything has changed. What he knew about fighting might have been good for his era, but it has nothing to do with contemporary boxing." As the afternoon's formal presentations began, Tony listened with professional attention to discussions about psychological preparation, competitive longevity, and the mental aspects of sustained high-level performance. His own contribution to the group discussion was characteristically insightful, emphasizing the importance of adapting training methods to changing physical capabilities while maintaining the psychological commitment that separated champions from ordinary competitors. Chuck had been observing Tony throughout the afternoon with growing respect for his obvious knowledge and genuine dedication to developing the next generation of fighters. The former boxer's insights about tactical preparation were sophisticated, his understanding of competitive psychology was evident, and his commitment to his students was undeniable. During the question and answer period that followed Chuck's presentation about mental discipline across extended careers, Tony raised his hand with the kind of respectful formality that characterized all his interactions but concealed fundamental skepticism about the relevance of Chuck's experience to contemporary competition. "Mr. Norris," Tony said, his voice carrying the measured tone of someone accustomed to being heard with respect in professional boxing circles. "I appreciate your insights about mental preparation and competitive longevity. However, I'm curious about how experience from decades ago translates to the realities of modern competition." Chuck nodded encouragingly, recognizing the underlying challenge in the question. "That's an excellent point, Tony. The sport has certainly evolved tremendously since my competitive days. The evolution has been fundamental," Tony continued, his tone maintaining professional courtesy while making his position clear. "Training methods, competitive levels, tactical sophistication, everything about serious fighting has advanced beyond what was available or necessary in previous generations. How do you see experience from a different era contributing to preparation for contemporary competition?" The question hung in the air with obvious challenge, though Tony's tone remained scrupulously professional. Dr. Santos leaned forward with interest, recognizing that this exchange might reveal something important about how current practitioners viewed contributions from previous generations. Chuck considered the question carefully before responding. "You're absolutely right about the evolution of training and competition. The level of sophistication in modern fighting is remarkable compared to what we had available decades ago." Tony's expression remained professionally neutral, but his eyes showed that Chuck's answer hadn't fully addressed his concerns about the practical relevance of outdated experience to contemporary training. "Given those changes, how do you see fighters from previous eras contributing meaningfully to current preparation and competition?" "I think the value is probably in principles rather than specific techniques," Chuck replied with genuine respect for Tony's expertise. "The physical methods have certainly evolved, but the mental discipline required for sustained excellence probably remains consistent across generations." Tony nodded politely, but his body language suggested that he remained unconvinced by what he viewed as an attempt to maintain relevance in a sport that had moved beyond the experience of previous generations. As the formal presentations concluded and the event moved into informal discussion and demonstration periods, he found himself increasingly bothered by what he saw as the group's uncritical acceptance of Chuck's perspectives on competitive excellence. During a break in the proceedings, Tony approached Chuck with the kind of respectful formality that boxing culture demanded, but with an underlying agenda that went beyond simple professional courtesy. "Mr. Norris," he said, maintaining proper boxing etiquette, "I hope you won't think me presumptuous, but I'd be very interested in seeing how competitive experience from previous eras translates to contemporary training methods. Perhaps you'd be willing to participate in a demonstration." Chuck's expression showed neither surprise nor defensiveness at what was clearly a challenge disguised as a professional request. "I'd be happy to participate in any way that would be helpful to the group." "Excellent," Tony said, his tone maintaining perfect boxing courtesy, while his eyes revealed satisfaction at having created an opportunity to demonstrate the limitations of outdated competitive experience in contemporary training contexts. "Perhaps we could explore some basic principles of timing and distance. I'm always interested in seeing how different generations approach fundamental concepts." Dr. Santos immediately recognized the significance of what was developing and discreetly signaled Eddie to begin documenting the interaction. This kind of spontaneous exchange between current practitioners and former champions was exactly the type of encounter their research was designed to analyze. Within minutes, a section of the gym had been cleared, and the seminar participants had gathered to observe what promised to be an illuminating demonstration of how different approaches to competitive preparation might interact in practical application. Tony prepared for the demonstration with boxing precision, removing his street clothes to reveal the lean, still powerful physique of someone who maintained serious training despite his retirement from active competition. His movements were economical and purposeful, each gesture reflecting the kind of tactical awareness that came from years of preparation for professional competition. Chuck's preparation was markedly different. He simply removed his polo shirt and stood quietly in the designated area, doing gentle stretching movements that looked more like meditation than athletic preparation. At 73, he no longer possessed the explosive athleticism of his competitive prime, but his presence suggested a different kind of readiness, not the coiled tension of someone preparing for contemporary competition, but the settled confidence of someone who understood exactly what he was capable of doing. "What would you like to explore?" Chuck asked, his tone indicating genuine interest in learning something from the exchange rather than proving anything about his own continued relevance. Tony's response revealed the depth of his confidence in contemporary boxing methodology. "Let's begin with basic timing and distance principles, fundamental concepts that have been refined through modern training methods and contemporary competitive experience." "Sounds good," Chuck agreed. "I should mention that I haven't trained specifically for boxing, so you'll probably need to adjust for different approaches." Tony moved into a classical boxing stance that demonstrated textbook form refined through years of professional competition. His positioning was perfect for the kind of tactical engagement that characterized modern boxing, and his mental preparation was obvious in his focused attention to distance, timing, and defensive positioning. "Please, engage as you would in contemporary training," Tony said, his confidence in modern boxing methodology absolute. "I'll demonstrate how current preparation handles approaches from previous eras." Chuck approached with respectful caution, engaging with Tony in what appeared to be a straightforward demonstration of basic boxing principles. Tony immediately applied one of his most refined techniques, a combination of footwork and counterpunching designed to demonstrate the superiority of contemporary boxing training over outdated competitive methods. But something unexpected happened. As Tony committed to techniques that had proven effective throughout his professional career, Chuck seemed to simply anticipate them. Not through superior boxing technique or contemporary training methods, but through an understanding of timing and distance that transcended specific technical approaches. Tony's attacks, technically perfect and tactically sophisticated though they were, found empty space. Chuck's responses weren't dramatic or athletic, but they were precisely timed and positioned to make Tony's technical superiority irrelevant without requiring superior boxing skills or contemporary training methods. "Interesting," Tony said, his confidence momentarily shaken but his determination intensified. "Let me try a different approach." This time, Tony employed more sophisticated tactics, using principles of boxing engagement that reflected advanced training in contemporary competitive methods. His technique was flawless, exactly as it had been refined through decades of professional experience and modern training methodology. Again, Chuck seemed to neutralize Tony's approach not through superior boxing technique or contemporary training, but through positioning and timing so subtle that most observers missed exactly what had happened. Tony's perfect boxing training found nothing to work against, leaving him extended and temporarily off balance while Chuck remained in perfect equilibrium. For the third attempt, Tony abandoned his teaching mode and began applying techniques with the intensity that had characterized his professional career. He employed a rapid series of boxing combinations, each one proven effective in professional competition, each one flowing smoothly into the next according to tactical patterns that represented decades of refined boxing thinking. Chuck responded to this increased intensity not with matching boxing technique or contemporary competitive methods, but with what appeared to be effortless adaptation. He seemed to read Tony's intentions before they were fully formed, responding to attacks that hadn't quite been launched yet and maintaining perfect balance regardless of what proven boxing techniques were being applied against him. After several minutes of this increasingly one-sided exchange, Tony stopped, breathing harder than someone of his conditioning should have been after what appeared to be a relatively controlled demonstration. "I don't understand," he said, his voice carrying genuine confusion rather than defensiveness. "Your technique, it doesn't follow contemporary boxing patterns, doesn't use modern training methods." But somehow, Chuck's expression showed only respectful attention, no trace of triumph or condescension. "Your boxing is genuinely excellent, Tony. Your technique is textbook perfect, and your competitive experience is obvious. Then how? You're applying boxing principles exactly as contemporary training taught you," Chuck explained patiently. "But you're applying them against an opponent you expected to encounter in modern competition, not the person who was actually standing in front of you." Tony looked confused, so Chuck continued. "Contemporary boxing teaches perfect techniques for competing against other contemporary boxers. But when you encounter someone who moves according to different principles, those specific applications become less effective." The insight hit Tony like a revelation. For all his technical sophistication, for all his understanding of modern boxing methodology, he had been fighting according to predetermined contemporary patterns rather than adapting to the actual tactical situation that confronted him. "But modern boxing," Tony began. Modern boxing is excellent for modern competition, Chuck agreed, but effective fighting requires adapting core principles to whatever circumstances actually present themselves, rather than expecting every situation to conform to contemporary competitive patterns. Mickey Torres stepped forward, recognizing that the demonstration had revealed something profound about the relationship between contemporary training and timeless fighting principles. What we've just witnessed, he said carefully, illustrates something fundamental about the nature of boxing mastery. Both approaches have value, but real understanding transcends any single generational approach. Tony stood in the center of the training area, his worldview undergoing the kind of fundamental reassessment that only comes from encountering something that challenges everything you thought you knew. For years, he had equated contemporary boxing technique with fighting mastery, believing that modern training methods represented the pinnacle of combat preparation. "I think," Tony said slowly, "I've been an excellent student of contemporary boxing, but perhaps not such a good student of timeless fighting principles." Chuck's response showed the kind of wisdom that could only come from decades of learning across multiple disciplines and generations. Contemporary boxing provides incredibly sophisticated tools for understanding tactical application. But the goal isn't to replace proven methods, it's to understand the principles behind them well enough that you can apply them to any situation. As the demonstration concluded and the gym began to return to normal activity, Tony approached Chuck with a request that would have been unthinkable at the beginning of the afternoon. "Chuck," he said, using the informal address for the first time, "would you be willing to work with our fighters? Not to change our boxing methods, but to help us understand how to apply contemporary techniques more adaptively." Chuck's response exemplified the humility that had characterized his entire approach to the interaction. "I think I could learn as much from your boxing program as I could contribute. Your technical foundation is incredibly solid, probably more sophisticated than anything I learned in competition. But maybe together we can explore how contemporary training and timeless principles can strengthen each other." In the months that followed, the Classic Boxing Club quietly incorporated elements of adaptive tactical thinking into its training curriculum. Tony maintained all the technical precision and contemporary methodology that had made his fighters successful, but he began approaching boxing techniques as expressions of underlying principles rather than rigid contemporary application. His fighters' performance improved measurably as they learned to apply proven boxing methods more flexibly in unpredictable competitive situations. More importantly, Tony's understanding of boxing preparation evolved to include not just technical proficiency but adaptive thinking under pressure. The documentation from that afternoon's demonstration became a case study in advanced boxing training programs throughout the regional boxing community, not because it showed old methods defeating contemporary techniques, but because it demonstrated how deep understanding could transcend apparent contradictions between different generational approaches to boxing preparation. A year later, when Tony was invited to speak at a national boxing symposium, he dedicated his presentation to what he called "the day I learned the difference between knowing contemporary boxing and understanding timeless fighting." Chuck characteristically deflected credit for Tony's professional growth. He already had everything he needed, Chuck told Dr. Santos when she asked about the transformation she had witnessed. "Sometimes we just need someone to help us see what we already know. And sometimes the most profound lessons come not from learning new techniques, but from discovering that mastery transcends generational boundaries, and that true champions recognize excellence regardless of when it was achieved, understanding that some principles remain as relevant today as they were decades ago."